Again, thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Justin Shug, and I'm with Ensable. And today we're going to talk about building strategic lists. This is part of our efforts and really the purpose of these bi-monthly calls, which is to help you to be both proactive and productive. In today's discussion, when I say list, I'm not referring to a group of emails that you can purchase from a Discover org or a ZoomInfo. What I'm referring to is a list. When I say list, I'm referring to individuals who have asked you to email them. So essentially, it's acquiring permission to send emails out to different prospects and companies. The permission behind this is not necessarily to give you legal permission, although that does help. It's really about gaining mind share. Because when your prospects ask for information from you and give you permission to actually reach out to them, it really makes it so that they pay more attention to the emails that you're sending to them. But before we get started, we do need emails to initiate this process. And there's lots of different great sources for that. I personally like to use LinkedIn as this source because what happens is if I connect with my prospects, I can download their email via LinkedIn. There's a section there's a video that we've done that talks about that. If you have any questions about how to download your LinkedIn connections, just go ahead and email Katie from Ensable, and she'll be able to forward that video over to you. But what's great about LinkedIn is that it has a self-healing nature to the contact list in it, where a lot of times when you purchase a list, the list automatically starts deteriorating over time. And so LinkedIn allows you to not only have that social connection with your prospects where you can even post LinkedIn information, but it allows you to maintain that contact information over the life of your career. And so this is a great way to invest in lists in terms of gathering email addresses and connecting with your prospects via LinkedIn. We'll spend more time on LinkedIn another day. There's definitely a number of calls that we need to do to address strategies around LinkedIn. But for today's discussion, I just wanted to highlight that as a great method of gathering email addresses for this strategy that we're talking about today. Once we have those email addresses, we want to create an incentive, essentially a mousetrap, that enables us to incentivize our prospects to the point that they're willing to give us their email address in exchange for some type of offer. So probably some of the better offers that you can give out there. You've probably seen a lot of these, but there's webinar series, kind of like what we do here at Ensable. A lot of folks offer ebooks, market trends, so basically insiders' views of what they're seeing in terms of the market, newsletters, white papers, case studies, email courses, pricing sheets are a great one, interviews with different industry experts, different tips, live events, and book summaries. I would focus, if I were you, I would focus on incentives that allow you to create content that you can archive, which then creates a virtual sales force for you because that content can be found over time and essentially do a lot of the selling for you. So once you have an incentive in place, you can create a landing page. And this specific type of landing page is known as a squeeze page. The difference between the two is the squeeze page is designed to convert your prospects and incentivize them, give them an offer in exchange for their email address. You don't need a lot of forms on here. This example on this page asks for their name and for their email address. I personally would just ask for their email address. You don't necessarily need their name. If you really needed their name, you could look it up via their email address. It's not that difficult. So, again, it seems counterintuitive to ask someone for their email address when you already have that email address, correct? But the purpose, again, behind this whole exercise is not necessarily to get their email address. It's to get their permission to contact them, which is really what this exercise is all about. We're trying to maintain contact with these prospects. And if we continue to email them over time, we're just going to get ignored. But the attitude that they have towards our emails and our communications with them will be very different when they subscribe to those rather than when we try to push that onto them without any type of subscription. So when we're talking about building a list, we're essentially talking about building a list of individuals who give us permission to contact them so that they actually read the emails. These types of communications are known as a sideways sales letter. The sideways sales letter is essentially breaking down our sales message into bits and bytes so that it can actually be consumed, because typically our entire message can't be consumed in a single setting. It needs to be consumed over time, and it also enables us to maintain contact with them. Now, we're not going to be sending them sales messages. It's going to be disguised in terms of valuable information. And in order for the information to actually be valuable, it needs to be focused. There's a much higher threshold in today's day and age to gain mind share and attention from the audiences that we're talking to. And the key ingredient to actually having anyone pay attention to anything that we send is it needs to be extremely focused in terms of the content needs to talk to our audience. And so we need to look at, when we're building these lists, who are we trying to prospect to? So let me give you a practical example. Let's say we wanted to create an ebook about how SD-WAN impacts IT security. This is a pretty compelling offer, but a better one would be, well, let's talk about how SD-WAN impacts IT security within banks. And an even better one would be how SD-WAN impacts IT security within credit unions. You'll find that it's much easier to have a higher conversion rate, but ultimately the whole purpose of narrowing this focus is the fact that the smaller the audience, the more willing they are to actually consume the information that you're giving them. And so again, that's the whole purpose of this exercise, is to get them to opt in, but also to read and gain their mind share by actually having them pay attention to what you're creating. If you haven't listened to our training on how to publish your first book recently, I would highly recommend that you review that via our YouTube channel. This will be very effective in helping you exercise and execute some of this strategy. Keep in mind that one of the best incentives that you can make in yourself is actually publishing a book. It'll separate you from the pack and ultimately make you much better authority when talking to your prospects. So once you start creating a list of prospects, you're now ready to start communicating with them. So there's a few rules that we want to keep in mind when we're talking to our prospects and having this sideways sales letter. The communications need to be short. Again, we're trying to break down the messaging over time. It needs to be targeted, both in terms of the content of the email and who our audience is. And what I mean by content, the content needs to be extremely relevant to the audience that we're talking to. It also needs to be informal. This is one of the areas that a lot of folks get hung up on, is they think that they need to create a fancy newsletter. That's actually counterproductive, because people are looking for authentic communications. And in the past, fancy newsletters helped create legitimacy for your company, but it's actually backfired for a lot of folks, because people are looking for something that feels more authentic. You'll find that your readership will be much higher with informal communications. The content should also be contagious. What I mean by that, it needs to be embedded with social currency. Social currency is when, if your prospect was to forward this information to someone else, it would make them look good. And so contagious data or contagious content is built with anything that helps the reader look good by forwarding it to someone else. There also needs to be a lot of reciprocity within the content and information that you're providing. Give them something for free, and you'll find that they will feel indebted to you. Also, make sure that you establish yourself as an authority, something that isn't very hard as you're communicating these things. You already become an authority, because you essentially becoming a source of information, which instantly makes you an authority on what you're trying to talk about. So let me give you a quick example. Let's go back to the banking example that we talked about earlier. And if I had a group of cooperating banking institutions, I would try to highlight 2 or 3 things within an email and try to help them understand recent events and changes that are taking place within their space. So I would highlight how the government shutdown is impacting, for instance, regulations or new security risks revolving around ATMs, or even a case study about how the lack of IT security resources has been impacting banks. It's always a good idea to have a link that goes back to your website, because this will help further cultivate your prospects over time. Now, there's a great resource. It's called Free from Chris Anderson. It's a book. You can download it literally for free from Audible, but it's definitely a great read to help fine-tune your messaging and your process in creating incentives and value via these sideways sales letters. I often get questioned about the timing elements of these emails. How often should I be communicating with my prospects? The answer to that question was found within a survey that was done among business users, where they were asked how frequently they would like to receive emails from different companies. And a vast majority, about 68%, expressed on a weekly basis. The main rule of thumb here, though, is you want to make sure that you only communicate with your prospects when there's something extremely valuable to provide to them. So don't feel forced to communicate with them via on a weekly basis unless you have something relevant to share. It's also a good idea to consider investing in surveys. We did a training on this a little while back. You're welcome to review that. But surveys allow you to create information that isn't already readily available across the internet. And that's one of the best incentives and one of the best value propositions that you can provide to your audience, answering questions that they have via survey and providing something that isn't already available. And that's one of the key incentives that we talked about earlier, about helping your audience have something that creates social currency, something that's unique. Now, something that would help enhance the conversation significantly is framing your conversations around something known as a super trend. A super trend are major shifts taking place in the next 10 years or so, where their world and our world will look very different because of these super trends. So a few examples of trends that we're seeing today is there's going to be a lot of inflation taking place within the government. There's going to be an increase in taxes to help finance some of the social programs that are being proposed. There's disruptive technologies that are destroying companies overnight. The millennials, from an HR perspective, are having a huge shift in terms of how companies function. There's going to be a lot more hiring and firing regulations. There's going to be more elderly people. There's going to be an increase in criminal activity, and business outsourcing is going to become the norm. And so some of these super trends, if you can frame your conversations around them, it'll make them much more potent. It's essentially the equivalent of adding salt to food. It makes your conversation so much more powerful when you can frame them in light of these super trends. Another important factor to take into consideration in your communication is features versus benefits. This is a common strategy where we need to avoid talking about features and talk more about benefits. And if you can take it a step further and talk about advantages, you would be 10 times more effective than your competition. Advantages is essentially taking the benefits of what your products and services do and essentially putting them into a situational knowledge where the context is extremely targeted, going back to that focusing effort. And so these types of strategies will definitely make it so that your messaging is getting read and not getting ignored. There's a few other resources that I'd like to highlight that might help fine-tune some of your strategies. There's a book by Jeff Walker known as Launch, extremely valuable for understanding some of these strategies. Also, Crushing It, and then Jab, 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 Right Hook. Check out those books. You can find them all on Audible. You can get through them pretty quickly, but there's a lot of valuable information that will help take what I'm sharing with you today and help you fine-tune a lot of what you're trying to do. So to summarize, Again, we're not trying to create a list just to get permission to email our prospects. We're creating a list so that our prospects will act, and in do so, they will pay more attention to what we're contacting them about. Now, we need to create an incentive strong enough to entice these prospects to actually give us their email address. Once we share that incentive via email, via social media, we'll start creating this list. And this list will enable us to execute on the sideways sales letter to help us maintain contact with our prospects, indirectly discuss our value proposition, and ultimately help them understand why they need to change. Now, a month from now, we're going to be talking about it's basically a study that we've been doing here at Ensabled for about the past year. It's the largest technology survey in the history of the Internet. We've been surveying millions of companies and data points to create interesting content and trends at a very granular level to help you have information that you can share within these communications with your prospects, something that's very valuable. And so going back to that whole survey discussion, we've done a lot of the surveying for you to make it possible to make it easier to communicate with your prospects going forward. We'll share with you how this all works, how to gain access to it, but that'll be a month from today. Next time we meet, we will have a guest speaker, Shane Snow, the author of Smart Cut, a book probably many of you have read, but it's an ingenious formula for accelerating success. So definitely join us for that next call. And with that, we'll go ahead and